Israel and Iran are at war. Two nations are currently locked in a deadly chess match that has played out in the shadows for decades. What began as covert operations, cyber sabotage, and proxy battles has exploded into a full-scale regional conflict that threatens to reshape the Middle East forever. This isn't just another border skirmish. This is the collision of two military powerhouses, each wielding cutting-edge weaponry and backed by global superpowers. But what really happened? With all the stories, it's hard to know how it started. But don't worry, we got you. Here is everything you need to know about how ancient grudges, modern weapons, and geopolitical chess moves have combined to create one of the most dangerous conflicts of our time. From the revolutionary roots of their hatred to the hypersonic missiles now screaming across Middle Eastern skies, we'll explore 5 critical aspects of this war that could determine the future of global power. Hit that like button if you're ready for an epic journey through one of the most complex and consequential conflicts of our generation. And let's dive in. Why are Israel and Iran enemies in the first place? To understand why missiles are flying and cities are burning today, we need to travel back to 1979, the year that transformed Iran from Israel's unlikely ally into its most dangerous enemy. See, before the Islamic Revolution, Iran, under the Shah, was actually one of Israel's closest partners in the region. So close that Israeli military advisors trained Iranian forces, trade flourished, and both nations saw eye to eye on containing Soviet influence. However, the relationship was complex. See, while cooperation existed, the Shah never established full diplomatic relations with Israel, and revolution has a way of rewriting history in blood. See, when Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Revolution swept through Iran, it didn't just overthrow a government, it birthed an entirely new ideological framework that placed Israel squarely in the crosshairs. The new Iranian regime declared Israel an illegitimate Zionist entity, occupying sacred Islamic land, transforming what had been a strategic partnership into an existential conflict. This wasn't just political theater. It was a fundamental reimagining of Iran's role in the Muslim world, with opposition to Israel becoming a cornerstone of revolutionary identity. Iran's strategy became devastatingly clear. If they couldn't destroy Israel directly, they would surround it with enemies. The world was introduced to the axis of resistance, a network of proxy forces that would become Iran's primary weapon against Israel. Israel had to face Hezbollah in Lebanon, one of Iran's most sophisticated proxies, armed with an arsenal that rivals many national armies. In Gaza, Iranian support flowed to Hamas and later to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, turning the coastal enclave into a fortress bristling with rockets and tunnels. The Houthis in Yemen also received Iranian backing, creating another front in this multi-dimensional conflict. Israel's response was equally calculating. Unable to strike Iran directly without triggering a regional war, Israeli intelligence agencies launched what many consider the most sophisticated covert campaign in modern history. The Mossad and Unit 8200 became legends in the shadows, conducting surgical strikes against Iranian nuclear scientists, unleashing cyber weapons like Stuxnet to cripple Iranian nuclear facilities, and orchestrating a campaign of sabotage that turned Iran's nuclear program into a constant battlefield. For over 4 decades, this was the nature of their conflict, a Cold War fought through proxies, assassinations, and cyber warfare. Iran would arm Israel's enemies and plot its destruction from afar, while Israel would strike Iranian assets across the region and work tirelessly to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Both sides understood the rules. Hit hard, but never so hard that it triggers full-scale war. Well, they did, until that understanding was completely shattered in June 2025. How the tension exploded in 2025. The transformation from shadow war to open conflict didn't happen overnight. Rather, it was the result of multiple pressure points reaching critical mass simultaneously throughout 2024 and early 2025. See, as we all know, Gaza had become increasingly volatile, while Hezbollah's rocket arsenal in southern Lebanon grew to an estimated 150,000 missiles pointed directly at Israeli cities. Syria remained Iran's highway for weapons smuggling, with Israeli jets conducting near-daily strikes to interrupt the flow of advanced weaponry. But the real game-changer came on June 13, 2025, when Israel made a decision that crossed every red line Iran had drawn. Under the codename Operation Rising Lion, Israeli forces launched a massive coordinated attack on Iranian soil, targeting dozens of nuclear facilities and military installations across the country. This wasn't a covert operation or limited strike. This was a full-scale assault designed to cripple Iran's nuclear program and military capabilities. Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters penetrated Iranian airspace, striking Revolutionary Guard installations and targeting critical components of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It was bad that satellite imagery revealed massive explosions at Iranian nuclear facilities, while cyber attacks simultaneously disrupted Iran's power grid and communication networks. Iran's response was swift and unprecedented. Within hours of Israeli strikes, Iranian forces launched waves of missiles and drones towards Israel, with attacks hitting the Tel Aviv area and Haifa to the north. For the first time since 1979, Iranian weapons were directly killing Israeli civilians on Israeli soil. The casualties mounted quickly. At least 13 people have been killed and 380 wounded in Israel since the conflict began, with Iranian strikes hitting civilian areas, including the port city of Haifa, while at least 224 people had been killed in Iran, according to Iran's Ministry of Health. Not to mention Iranian missiles struck power stations and infrastructure, significantly damaging critical facilities. The regional dominoes began falling immediately. Hezbollah, honor-bound by its alliance with Iran, began preparing for potential involvement, while Iranian-backed militias across the region watched closely. What had been a bilateral shadow conflict suddenly threatened to become a multi-front regional war. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this escalation is its unpredictability. Unlike previous Middle Eastern conflicts with clear objectives and defined battlefields, this war is being fought simultaneously in cyberspace, on land, at sea, and in the air across thousands of miles. Israel has warned Iranian civilians living near weapons facilities to evacuate, while Iran has issued similar warnings to Israeli citizens. Commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz faces electronic interference, and the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed concerns about damage to nuclear facilities. Each strike demands a counterstrike. Each escalation requires a response, and both sides are discovering that the rules of engagement they spent decades perfecting no longer apply to this new reality. The shadow war that defined Israel-Iran relations for over 4 decades has finally emerged into the light, and the consequences are being felt across the entire Middle East. As the conflict continues into its 6th day, with both sides showing no signs of backing down, the international community watches nervously as 2 regional powers with sophisticated military capabilities engage in direct combat for the first time in modern history. What began as a covert campaign of mutual deterrence has become an open war with implications that extend far beyond the borders of Israel and Iran. And the best way to understand it is by looking at the weapons involved. the weapons being used right now. See, this isn't your grandfather's Middle Eastern war. The weapons systems clashing in the skies above the region can only be described as the cutting edge of 21st century military technology, and the results are absolutely devastating. What makes this conflict particularly terrifying is how it shows the democratization of precision warfare, where relatively inexpensive weapons can achieve disproportionate strategic impact. Basically, everybody has the power to cause destruction for cheap. For example, Iran's arsenal reads like a catalog of modern asymmetric warfare, and the backbone of their offensive capability lies in their ballistic missile program, featuring weapons like the Shahab 3, with its 2,000-kilometer range, capable of reaching any target in Israel. But the real game changers are in Iran's newer hypersonic weapons, basically missiles that travel at over 5 times the speed of sound, making them nearly impossible to intercept. The Fatah-1, for example, Iran's first operational hypersonic missile, can reach targets in under 7 minutes from launch, leaving virtually no time for evacuation or defensive response. But if that was bad, then let me introduce you to Iran's suicide drones, the Shahed 136 flying bombs, which, by the way, is a weapon the world first got to see in the Ukrainian war. We did a whole video on that. It's in the description. Check it out. These relatively cheap weapons, costing around $20,000 each, can be launched in massive swarms, overwhelming even the most sophisticated air defense systems through sheer numbers. And as it stands, Iran has reportedly deployed thousands of these weapons across the region, turning every shipping container and warehouse into a potential launch site for attacks that can occur weeks or months after positioning. Israel's response, on the other hand, is what happens when unlimited defense budgets meet existential threats. The Iron Dome system, for example, originally designed to intercept short-range rockets, has been supplemented by the Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missile system, capable of intercepting targets in space itself. These interceptors cost over $3 million each, but when you're facing Iranian missiles carrying 500-kilogram warheads aimed at Tel Aviv, the math becomes brutally simple. Then there's the F-35I Adir stealth fighters, Israel's primary offensive weapon, capable of penetrating the most sophisticated air defense systems while carrying precision-guided munitions that can destroy targets with surgical accuracy. Each aircraft costs over $100 million, but their ability to operate undetected in hostile airspace makes them invaluable for strikes deep inside Iranian territory. They are so effective that Israeli pilots have reportedly conducted missions lasting over 10 hours, refueling multiple times to reach targets over 1,000 miles from their home base. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this conflict is the role of cyber warfare. See, both nations have deployed cyber weapons that can cripple enemy infrastructure without firing a single conventional shot. Israel's Unit 8200 has even shown the ability to shut down Iranian power grids, communication networks, and even sabotage weapon systems remotely. And Iran's cyber capabilities, while less sophisticated, have proven capable of disrupting Israeli financial systems and civilian infrastructure, turning every smartphone and computer into a potential battlefield. And as if that's not chaotic enough, the proxy forces add another layer of complexity to this technological arms race. Take Hezbollah's arsenal, for example. It includes an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles, ranging from simple Katyusha rockets to sophisticated guided missiles capable of hitting specific buildings in Israeli cities. Not to mention the fact that the organization has essentially turned southern Lebanon into a fortress with underground tunnels, command bunkers, and launch sites that rival those of many national armies. So, with all that said, the question on everyone's mind now is this World War III? Who's involved and who might join? Well, what began as a bilateral conflict between Israel and Iran has rapidly evolved into a complex multi-regional war involving superpowers, proxy forces, and reluctant regional players, each calculating their moves on a chessboard where one wrong decision could trigger global catastrophe. The alliance structures coming from this conflict are reshaping geopolitical relationships that have defined international relations for decades. The United States, for example, finds itself walking a tightrope between supporting its closest Middle Eastern ally and avoiding a broader war that could devastate the global economy. But don't get it wrong. American military support for Israel has been unprecedented, with emergency shipments of interceptor missiles, intelligence sharing, and reportedly, direct assistance with targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group has taken position in the eastern Mediterranean, while B-52 bombers have been deployed to bases across the region as a deterrent signal to Iran and its allies. On the opposing side, Iran's support network tells a story of shifting global power dynamics. Russia, already strained by its conflict in Ukraine, has provided Iran with advanced air defense systems and electronic warfare capabilities, seeing an opportunity to tie down American resources in another theater. China, while publicly calling for de-escalation, has reportedly increased its purchases of Iranian oil, basically providing crucial economic lifelines that help fund Iran's war machine. And here's the thing. The proxy battlefield extends across thousands of miles. In Lebanon, Hezbollah has effectively transformed the country into Iran's forward operating base, launching thousands of rockets that have forced the evacuation of northern Israeli cities. The organization's estimated 100,000 fighters are even scarier, as they are a more capable military force than most national armies, equipped with precision-guided missiles that can strike specific targets throughout Israel. Syria has become the highway for Iranian weapons and personnel, with President Assad's forces providing logistical support despite the obvious risks to their territory. So much so that Israeli strikes on Syrian soil have become routine, but each attack risks escalating Syria's involvement from passive enablement to active participation. The Houthis in Yemen have opened a maritime front, using Iranian-supplied missiles to target Israeli shipping in the Red Sea and threaten one of the world's most critical trade routes. It's so bad that their attacks on commercial vessels have forced major shipping companies to reroute around Africa, adding thousands of miles and billions in costs to global trade. But perhaps most critically, the Gulf states find themselves caught between their normalization efforts with Israel and their fear of Iranian retaliation. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain have quietly provided intelligence support to Israel while publicly calling for de-escalation. Their calculus is brutally simple. They fear Iranian dominance more than they oppose Israeli actions, but they cannot afford to be seen as active participants in a war against a fellow Muslim nation. Turkey, too, is in the mix somehow as the most unpredictable variable in this equation. President Erdogan's government has condemned Israeli actions while maintaining economic relationships with Iran, but Turkey's NATO membership and strategic interests create conflicting pressures that could force difficult choices. Jordan and Egypt, despite their peace treaties with Israel, face massive internal pressure to limit cooperation, while Iraq struggles to control Iranian-backed militias operating from its territory. The most terrifying possibility of this all is perhaps the involvement of Pakistan, whose nuclear weapons and complex relationship with Iran could dramatically escalate the conflict's stakes. While Pakistan has historically maintained careful neutrality in Middle Eastern conflicts, growing pressure from its Shia population and economic dependence on Iranian energy could force increasingly difficult decisions. So, with all that going on, what happens next? Are we cooked? What happens next? Well, we stand at the most dangerous crossroads in Middle Eastern history since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where every decision carries the weight of potential catastrophe and the margin for error has shrunk to virtually nothing. The question isn't whether this conflict will reshape the region, it's whether it will reshape the world. Iran's nuclear program has basically become the ultimate red line that could transform this regional war into a global crisis. Intelligence estimates suggest Iran is now within weeks of weapons-grade uranium enrichment, a timeline that has compressed dramatically as the conflict has intensified. Israeli leadership has made clear that a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable under any circumstances, setting up a potential scenario where Israel launches preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, regardless of the consequences. Such an attack would likely require the use of Israel's most powerful bunker-busting weapons, potentially including tactical nuclear devices, crossing a threshold that hasn't been breached since World War II. The economic implications alone could trigger a global recession. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes, remains under constant threat of closure by Iranian forces. Oil prices have spiked 40% since the conflict began, and a complete closure could triple prices overnight, devastating economies already struggling with inflation and supply chain disruptions. The Red Sea shipping route, equally critical for global trade, faces daily attacks that have forced major shipping companies to add weeks and thousands of dollars to delivery costs. But the saddest part is that the humanitarian crisis is expanding exponentially. Over 800,000 people have been displaced across the region, with Lebanese, Syrian, and Iranian civilians bearing the brunt of the violence. Israeli cities have been largely evacuated north of Haifa, while Iranian cities face daily blackouts and infrastructure failures. The casualty count, already in the thousands, threatens to reach levels not seen since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. As it stands, international efforts at de-escalation face the brutal reality that both sides now see this as an existential conflict. The United Nations Security Council remains paralyzed by vetoes from permanent members with opposing interests. China and Russia block resolutions condemning Iran, while the United States vetoes measures critical of Israeli actions. European attempts at mediation are more or less a joke because the two sides' war aims are simply alarming. Iran demands Israel's destruction, while Israel demands Iran's complete withdrawal from the region. But it still gets worse. The conflict is creating precedents that could define warfare for decades. The successful use of hypersonic weapons, the effectiveness of drone swarms, and the integration of cyber warfare with conventional military operations are being studied by military planners worldwide. In fact, North Korea has reportedly deployed observers to Iranian positions, while China watches carefully to understand how these technologies might apply to a potential conflict over Taiwan. The ultimate question facing world leaders is whether traditional deterrence frameworks can even contain a conflict between two nations that view each other's existence as a sin. See, unlike the Cold War, where mutual assured destruction created stability through fear, this conflict features adversaries who may be willing to accept catastrophic losses to achieve their objectives. Time is running out for diplomatic solutions. Each day brings new escalations, new red lines crossed, and new players drawn into the vortex. The international community faces a choice between accepting a new Middle Eastern order shaped by warfare or intervening decisively to prevent a catastrophe that could reshape global civilization itself. In the end, the Israel-Iran war is more than just another Middle Eastern conflict. It's a glimpse into the future of warfare itself, where ancient hatreds meet cutting-edge technology and where regional conflicts can instantly become global crises. From the revolutionary roots to the hypersonic missiles now reshaping the battlefield, this war is a masterclass and how quickly our interconnected world can spiral toward catastrophe. But what do you think will happen next? Will international pressure force a ceasefire? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a border regional war that could reshape the global order? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this discussion respectful, because real people are living through this nightmare right now. If this deep dive into one of the most consequential conflicts of our time provided insights you hadn't considered before, smash that like button and subscribe for more analysis of the events reshaping our world. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our coverage as this situation continues to develop, because, unfortunately, this story is far from over. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you in the next one.